A lonely cowboy bought a ranch for $1, then met the girl living inside. Before we ride into this story, take a moment to drop a comment below. Let us know where you're watching from, what town or city you're calling home tonight, and when they end this story, don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. Now lean back, get comfortable, and enjoy the story. He bought a ranch for $1 and found a heartbeat inside. The place should have been empty, a forgotten stretch of Wyoming grassland where wind played its lonely tune through a broken fence. But when Nolan Cassidy turned the brass knob of that weathered front door, he heard it. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, like someone pacing in a dream they didn't want to wake from. He froze on the threshold, dust motes drifting in the sun behind him, wondering if his 5 years of hard saving had just bought him a problem instead of a home. Then she appeared at the top of the staircase, a woman who didn't look surprised to see him. No scream, no startle, just the calm gaze of someone who'd been waiting and maybe dreading this very moment. "You must be the new owner," she said, and something in her voice told Nolan Cassidy that his bargain had come with a price no man could measure in dollars. The wind carried the smell of dry grass and sun-baked earth across Ravendraw Ranch that day. 100 acres of half-forgotten promise, bought for the price of a cup of coffee. Nolan Cassidy had been saving for 5 years to claim his own piece of the West. Every blister from a hammer, every long day in the carpentry shop, every coin tucked away in a tobacco tin. It had all been for this, not to make him rich, but to make him rooted. A man could work himself to the bone for other folks' dreams, or he could work the same bone for his own. Nolan had made his choice. The ranch was supposed to be empty. That's what the seller, Boone Carter, had told him. No one's been in that place for years. You'll have it all to yourself. But Carter hadn't looked him in the eye when he said it. Nolan remembered that now. He stepped into the parlor, boots thudding on worn floorboards that still held the faint smell of wood smoke from winters long past. The wallpaper had faded to the color of old sage leaves, and the curtains were stiff with dust. This was a house that had been waiting for something. And upstairs, it seemed, it had been waiting for someone. Iris Quaid stood at the top of the staircase, dark hair loose around her shoulders, a plain dress that had known better days. She didn't run. She didn't scream. She just watched him with an expression that said she'd known this day would come. "You must be the new owner," she said. Nolan had heard confidence before, but this wasn't it. This was resignation, the quiet steel of someone who had been bracing for a fight for so long they'd forgotten what peace felt like. He asked her name. Iris Quaid said she'd been taking care of the place. For who? He asked. She didn't answer right away, just crossed the room to a window, pulled back the curtain. Beyond it lay the grasslands, endless and silent in the late day sun. "This place saved my life," she said, "and I've been returning the favor." Nolan studied her face, the lines drawn by wind, worry, and whatever ghosts had chased her here. She wasn't a squatter in the usual sense. She was something else. A caretaker, maybe a fugitive, maybe both. And for the first time, the weight of this $1 ranch settled on him. It was more than wood and nails, more than grass and dust. It was a story, and he just stepped into the middle of it. Would she dare to stay? Part 1. The Wyoming afternoon light spilled long and low across the prairie, wrapping the land in gold and shadow. Out here, distance wasn't measured in miles, but in the silence between one heartbeat and the next, Nolan Cassidy stood in the doorway of what, at least on paper, was now his ranch. But paper was cheap, and the land in the West was a jealous mistress. She gave nothing freely and took back whatever she pleased. His boots creaked against the tired floorboards as he stepped inside. Dry timber and the faint musk of mouse nests rose in the still air, a room sealed for years. He set his satchel down on the wooden table, sending a lazy puff of dust into the light. He had expected solitude. He had planned for it. Solitude didn't argue, didn't disappoint, didn't wake you in the middle of the night with the sound of a name you could no longer speak aloud. But now, he wasn't alone. She stood halfway down the staircase, watching him as though he might vanish if she blinked. A dress, faded and frayed at the hem, brushed against her knees. Her hands rested lightly on the banister, but her posture carried a certain readiness, like a deer that had been hunted too often to truly rest. "I didn't expect company," Nolan said, his voice low. "You weren't supposed to have any," she replied, without apology. "But here you are." He nodded once. It explained nothing, yet they let the silence stand. An hour passed, maybe more, before either spoke again. Nolan busied himself with the chores of a man trying to ignore a storm in his own front yard. The pump was dry. The roof sagged on the north side. The corral had rotted boards ready to give way under a steer's weight. Through it all, he caught glimpses of her. Iris Quaid. She moved like someone who knew the house's every complaint. The stair that groaned too loudly. The summer-stuck windows. The latch that had to be lifted before turning. She didn't tell him to leave. She didn't offer to leave herself. It was the strangest stalemate he'd ever walked into. By evening, the wind had picked up a slow, deliberate wind carrying the cool breath of autumn. Nolan sat on the porch rail, rolling a cigarette he didn't light. Iris appeared in the doorway, arms folded. "Boone Carter sell you the place?" she asked. "For how much?" He glanced at her. "$1." She almost smiled. "Almost. That's about what it's worth." "If you don't know the history." "What's the history?" Her eyes drifted past him, toward the dying sun, melting into bands of rose and copper. "It's not the kind of story you tell to strangers." "Then we're even," he said. "I'm not the kind of stranger that asks twice." But he wanted to, more than twice. If he was honest, there was something in her voice, the same quiet strain he'd heard in his own, when folks back in town asked about his wife. Loss recognizes loss. That night, Nolan unrolled his bedroll in the small front room. Close to the hearth, 2 bedrooms stood empty upstairs. But he'd be damned if he took one without knowing where she planned to sleep. Near sleep, he heard her footsteps above, slow, pacing. A woman alone with her thoughts and her ghosts. He rolled onto his back, staring into the dark. This ranch was meant to be his fresh start, a way out of the hollow road he'd been walking since the day they lowered his wife into the ground. But the air here was thick with someone else's unfinished business. He wondered, for the first time, if he'd bought more than he could carry. Morning brought frost silvering the grass and a pale sun straining to burn it away. Nolan was chopping kindling when Iris stepped outside, a kettle dangling from one hand. "There's a pump by the barn," he said. "I know," she answered. Not defiance, just fact. She knew every inch of this land because she had lived it longer than anyone in years. She pumped the handle, the squeak sharp in the still air. Clear water spilled into the kettle. Her shoulders stayed set like stone. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet. 3 years ago, I came here with nothing but the clothes on my back. This place kept me alive." Nolan said nothing. "My father died in a mine cave-in," she went on, "only it wasn't an accident. The Maddox brothers owned the mine, at least on paper, but my father found gold where their maps swore there was none. He staked a claim. They couldn't have that." Her gaze drifted toward the far hills. "One day, he went down to check the supports, never came back. Folks said the beams gave way. I know better. Someone weakened them on purpose." Her fingers tightened around the kettle handle. "After he was gone, They came for the claim, turned up with forged papers saying he'd sold it to them. They took our land, our house, everything. Nolan's axe struck the log with a sharp crack. He knew that look in her eyes, the hollow ache of losing something no one had the right to take. "So, you ran," he said. "So I took back what was mine." She corrected softly, "The deed, the survey maps, proof of the claim, enough to ruin them if it ever reached a judge they didn't own. And you've been hiding here ever since." She nodded. "Harper's been hunting me for 3 years. Works for the Maddox brothers. He's the kind of man who doesn't stop until the job's done." "What makes you think they'll find you here?" "They will," she said simply. "Not if, not maybe. Will." Some folks carried trouble like a pocket knife, always close, always ready to cut if you reached for it. If trouble was coming to Ravendraw Ranch, it was his trouble now, but he didn't say it aloud. Not yet. Instead, he nodded toward the loose corral rail. "We'll need to mend that before the cattle get any ideas." She hesitated, then set the kettle down and joined him. They worked without speaking, passing nails and tools between them in a quiet rhythm. Two people bound more by necessity than trust. And still, in that quiet, something shifted. Not peace, but the first stirrings of common ground. By mid-afternoon, the wind changed. It carried a low, rhythmic sound, distant, but drawing closer. Hoofbeats. Nolan straightened, eyes sweeping the horizon. Iris froze, her gaze narrowing on the main trail. She didn't have to say it. He read it in her face. They'd found her. Her hand gripped the splintered fence rail, knuckles white. Autumn wind tangled her hair as 3 riders appeared on the far ridge, black silhouettes against the sinking sun. Sound cue for editors. A low, rising drumbeat under the wind, carrying us into the next part. Part 2. They came slow, the way men ride when they've already decided there's no hurry. The way they ride when they believe whatever they've come for isn't going anywhere. Nolan stayed by the fence rail, watching them cross the open stretch. Iris didn't move. She stood rooted, the wind pulling her hair across her face, eyes fixed on those 3 dark riders. By the time they reached the yard, he could make out the faces hard set, worn by the kind of places where fists and pistols speak louder than law. The man in the middle swung down first, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in black gone trail dust gray. His spurs gave a lazy jingle as he stepped forward. He tipped his hat just enough to show a smile that never made it to his eyes. "Afternoon," he drawled. Names, Wade Harper. Iris's fingers dug into the fence rail until her knuckles shone white. The air between them felt tighter now, like a rope drawn to breaking. Harper's gaze wandered from Nolan to her, and back again. "Looks like you've found yourself some company, Miss Quaid." Nolan didn't take the bait. "This is private property," he said evenly. "State your business." Harper's smile edged wider. "Oh, I'll state it. We're here to have a conversation with the lady about some property that ain't rightfully hers. My employer's been missing it for quite some time." "Your employer got a name?" Nolan asked. "You don't need to worry about that," Harper said, his eyes narrowing. "What you do need to worry about is whether you're going to make this easy or hard." Behind him, the 2 mounted men drifted apart just enough to cover the yard from different angles. The move was casual, practiced, not for show. Nolan stayed where he was. "Far as I know, anything on this ranch belongs to me now." "That's cute," Harper said with a dry chuckle. "But we both know you didn't buy it for $1 without knowing what you'd find here." Iris stepped forward, her voice tight. "He didn't know anything about me." "That's so," Harper said, tilting his head toward her. "Then I guess that makes him an unlucky man." His eyes slid back to Nolan. "You got no reason to get tangled in this. Step aside. Let us finish our business, and we'll be gone before supper." Nolan didn't move. Inside, Iris slipped toward the hearth. Nolan caught the flicker of her skirts in the doorway and didn't need to ask what she was doing. She was hiding whatever it was they'd come for. Harper's voice followed him toward the porch. Last chance. Friend, call her out, or I'll come in and get her myself. You cross this porch, Nolan said, and I'll consider you trespassing. Harper's smile thinned to nothing. Trespassing. Out here. His hand drifted to the butt of his pistol. You talk like law matters this far from town. Nolan didn't answer. Some silences are louder than words. The wind shifted again. This time, it carried another sound. Faint, but distinct. Hoofbeats. Harper glanced toward the eastern ridge, then back at Nolan. You got friends coming. Not that I know of, Nolan said. The sound was closer now. Harper's men shifted in their saddles, uneasy. Search the house, Harper told one of them without looking away from Nolan. The rider swung down and started for the porch. That's when Iris stepped into the doorway. Chin high, eyes lit, with the kind of defiance you only see in someone who's been running too long. You want me, she said. Then leave him out of it. He's got nothing to do with your fight. Sweetheart, Harper said. Your fight's whoever I say it is. The hoofbeats rolled nearer, too loud now to ignore. From the rise beyond the creek, 4 riders appeared at a gallop, dust boiling up behind them. Their horses were white-lipped with sweat, and sunlight flashed sharp off the badge on the lead rider's vest. Harper's smile faltered. Well, he muttered, ain't this interesting? Sheriff Bennett's voice cut across the yard like a rifle crack. Harper, step away from those people. The deputies fanned wide, boxing in Harper's men. The air went still, that dangerous stillness, the kind that comes right before the first gun is drawn. Part 3. The moment Sheriff Elias Bennett swung down from his saddle, the air in the yard shifted. Not just the way it changes when the law shows up, but the way it does when an old score walks back into the room. Bennett was a lean man, silver whiskers framing a face carved by wind and years. His eyes were sharp, deliberate, the kind that measured men, the way a rancher measures stock. Weighing worth against risk, weighed Harper, Bennett called, letting the name drift on the wind like a bad smell. You're a long way from the Maddox spread. Harper didn't flinch. Business takes a man where it needs to. Business, Bennett's tone was flat as dry earth. That what you call chasing a woman across 3 territories. That's what I call retrieving stolen property. Harper said, polite on the surface, brittle underneath. Now, Sheriff, if you'd be so kind, step aside and let me finish my job. Bennett stayed planted, one hand resting near the butt of his Colt, but not drawing. See? Wade, here's your problem. I've got a warrant for your arrest, murder, robbery, conspiracy, and the man you murdered was Thomas Quaid. The name struck like a hammer blow. Beside Nolan, Iris went rigid. Her breath caught sharp in her chest. Harper's jaw flexed, but he forced a smirk. That's a lie. Bennett's gaze didn't waver. Old Pete Harden saw. You saw you, and the Maddox boys weakening the mine supports the day before Thomas was killed. He's been hiding ever since, afraid you'd come looking. But he's done running. He told me everything. Iris stepped forward, her voice low, shaking, but laced with steel. You killed my father. Harper didn't so much as glance at her. His eyes stayed fixed on Bennett, like she was nothing but another obstacle between him and what he wanted. That old drunk's word won't hold in court. Maybe not, Bennett said, but mix his testimony with the original deed and those survey maps your employer's so desperate for, and it's enough to hang all 3 of you. That's when Nolan saw it. A tremor in Harper's hand, not fear of the gallows exactly, but the sharp awareness that his grip on this day was slipping. Johnny, Harper snapped to the sharp-eyed rider still in the saddle. Get in that house. Find those papers. Johnny hesitated. Sheriff says you're wanted for murder. Wade. That mean me too, if I help you. Just do it. Harper barked, his voice cracking at the edges. But Johnny didn't move. His eyes flicked from Bennett's steady hand to Nolan's unblinking stare, and he found no good ground to stand on. Then Iris's voice sliced the standoff clean in two. Stop. She stood straighter now. Gaze locked on Harper. You want the documents? Fine. They're under the loose floorboard by the fireplace. Nolan turned on her. Sharp. Iris. It's the only way to end this, she said, cutting him off, eyes never leaving Harper's. You let him go. She nodded toward Nolan. And I'll give you what you came for. It was surrender, and it landed in Nolan's gut like a kick. 3 years of running, hiding, surviving, and now she was ready to hand it all away. For him. Bennett's voice came low. Measured, Miss Quaid. You give those up, and they'll kill you anyway. You know that. Harper's smirk slid back into place, thin and mean. Or maybe we'll be generous, he said. Depends how agreeable you feel. That was it. The moment Nolan felt something in him set solid and cold, like lead poured in a mold. He hadn't fought for much since the day they lowered his wife into the ground. But he'd fight for this. For her, from the ridge, behind the sheriff's men. A hawk screamed sharp and sudden, splitting the moment clean in two. Nolan's pulse was steady now. No more weighing the odds. No more wondering what was smart. If Harper took one step toward her, Nolan would draw, and if it ended here, in the dust of Ravendraw Ranch, then so be it. Part 4. The yard lay coiled, like a rattlesnake, silent, still, humming, with the promise of violence. Bennett's deputies had fanned out in a shallow arc, rifles steady, eyes flicking between Harper and his two riders. Nolan stood just inside the porch rail, boots planted, one hand hanging loose near the butt of his Colt. Iris was beside him, close enough that he could feel the tremor in her breath. Harper broke the stillness first. You've got 10 seconds, Quaid, he said, his voice low, tight. Bring me those papers, or watch your friend die on his own porch. He took a slow step forward, spurs chiming like a warning bell. Nolan's voice came calm and even. You cross that rail, Harper, and you don't walk back? That was the match strike. Harper's pistol cleared leather in a blur. And in that same heartbeat, Nolan shoved Iris hard to the side and drew. The world fractured. A gunshot cracked from Harper's side, close enough to sting Nolan's cheek with splinters from the porch post. Bennett's deputies answered with sharp, disciplined fire. One of Harper's men pitched backward out of the saddle, hitting the dirt with a thud. The other wheeled for the cottonwood line, his rifle slapping against his leg as he fled. Harper ducked low, firing twice toward the porch. Nolan dropped to one knee, returning fire. His second shot struck home. Harper staggered, a red bloom spreading across his side. And then it was over. Harper's pistol slipped from his hand, landing in the dust. With a dull thud, he stood swaying, eyes narrowing not in pain, but in disbelief. You think this ends it? He rasped, blood darkening his shirt. The Maddox brothers won't stop. Bennett strode forward, revolver still leveled. Maybe not, but you're done. Wade. Harper's knees gave way, dropping him before he slumped sideways into the dirt. The silence that followed was strange. No cheer, no breath of relief, just the shuffle of horses, the creak of leather, and the whisper of wind across the grass. Nolan holstered his pistol, his breathing steady now for the first time since those hoofbeats first touched the horizon. Beside him, Iris stood rigid, her eyes locked on Harper's still form. Bennett looked from one to the other. You both, all right. Nolan nodded. We will be. Iris didn't answer. She brushed past him, stepped off the porch, and crouched beside Harper's body. For a long moment, she only looked at the man who had stolen her father's life and chased her into years of running. Then she reached down, took his revolver from the dust. With deliberate care, she swung out the cylinder, spilled the remaining cartridges into her palm, and let them fall between her fingers into the dirt. Only then did she drop the weapon beside him and turn back toward the porch. That walk back slow, deliberate, was not the walk of the woman Nolan had first seen standing at the top of the staircase. She looked taller now, not lighter grief, still clung to her shoulders, but straighter, steadier. She stepped onto the porch and met Nolan's gaze. "I'm done running," she said quietly. Something in him, something hollow, since the day he buried his wife, answered in kind. "Then I'll stand with you." The deputies slung Harper's body over his horse and led the surviving outlaw away. Bennett stayed behind, taking statements, collecting the documents Iris had guarded for so long. When he finally swung back into his saddle, he left them with a simple promise. "I'll be back to take you to the courthouse. Miss Quaid, the Maddox brothers are going to answer for what they've done." They stood together on the porch and watched the lawman ride over the ridge. The yard felt larger now, emptier, but somehow more theirs. That night, the fire in the hearth burned higher than it had in years. Nolan sat in the rocker, boots off, letting the day's weight settle into his bones. Iris sat at the table, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, gone cold. "You could leave," he said finally. "No one would blame you." She studied him for a long moment before shaking her head. "This place gave me shelter when I had nothing. Feels wrong to turn my back on it now." Nolan watched her in the glow of the fire. He realized then this was no longer just his ranch. Whatever had been forged in the dust and gunpowder of that afternoon belonged to them both now. Part 5. The night over Ravendraw Ranch was the kind of black that swallows the horizon whole. No moon, yet only a scatter of stars strewn across the Wyoming sky, like a box of diamonds spilled over black velvet. The wind had gone still. Even the coyotes seemed to know the day had already taken enough from the living. Inside, the fire burned low, a slow, steady heartbeat in the hearth. Nolan sat at the table, a ledger open before him, though the page was empty. His gaze kept drifting to the front door, where Iris stood in the threshold, looking out into the dark. She'd traded the plain dress she'd worn through the day for a work shirt and trousers clothes that belonged to the life she'd made here, not the one she'd been running from. "You should rest," Nolan said quietly. Her voice was steady. "I'm not tired." He didn't press her. He knew nights like that. Nights when sleep stayed just out of reach because the silence itself was too loud. He'd lived through enough of them after his wife passed. She turned toward him, firelight tracing her face. "You think they'll really stand trial?" Nolan thought of the Maddox brothers, of the way power clung to some men like a second skin. "Bennett's a good man," he said at last, "but justice out here." He let the words trail away. Her lips curved faintly, but it wasn't a smile. "I've lived too long waiting for justice to believe in it all the way." "Maybe it's not about believing all the way," Nolan said. "Maybe it's about believing enough to try." They let the quiet settle between them. Not awkward quiet, but the kind where two people are holding the same thought in different hands. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. "When my father was alive, we used to sit outside after supper. He'd tell me what this place could be, a home, a ranch, a life worth fighting for." Her gaze drifted to the window, to the dark sweep of land beyond. "After he was gone, I just kept it standing, patched the roof, mended fences, kept the well clean. Like if I could keep the place breathing, maybe I could keep a piece of him alive too." Nolan understood that better than he wanted to admit. He thought of his own place after his wife died, of the way he let her garden go to seed, but could never bring himself to tear it down. You've done more than keep it breathing. He told her, you've kept it ready. Ready for what? For someone who sees what you see in it. Her eyes met his open now, not guarded as they had been. Open the way. Only someone can be after you've stood side by side when the guns came out. The fire popped softly. Nolan rose, crossed to the mantel, and took up the rolled documents, the deed, the survey maps, the paper that had cost Iris 3 years of running. He weighed them in his hands. These are worth more than the ranch, he said, but they mean nothing if you're not here to use them. She stepped closer, close enough for him to catch the faint scent of wood smoke in her hair. And if I'd left today, they wouldn't mean anything to me either. Outside, the wind shifted, brushing the dry grass. Nolan thought of the fences waiting for repair, the barn needing new shingles before winter, the wide work of the land. Work that didn't break you. Work that built something worth holding. This place is too big for one pair of hands, he said. Her answer came without hesitation. Then it's a good thing there's 2 of us. They stood there a moment, 2 people who'd begun the day as strangers, now bound by something no handshake could measure. Finally, Nolan extended his hand. Partners. Her fingers closed around his. Firm and sure. Partners. Later, they stepped out onto the porch. The cold bit sharp. The prairie rolling away in silver shadow under a sky so full of stars it looked like it might split. Far off, a coyote yipped, answered by another beyond the ridge. The sound wasn't lonely tonight, just part of the land's own breathing. Iris wrapped her arms around herself. Feels different now, she murmured. What does this place? Like it's not just a hiding place anymore. Like it's ours. Nolan let that word hang between them. Ours. From inside, lamplight spilled warm across the porch boards. He could picture mornings here. Coffee in tin cups, biscuits baking, the sun edging over the cottonwoods, afternoons, fixing fence with the wind in the grass. Evenings like this, quiet and sure. It wasn't the life he'd planned when he bought the ranch. It wasn't the life she'd imagined when she first fled here. But maybe it was better not built on what they'd lost, but on what they were willing to build together. The stars wheeled slow overhead. For the first time in years, Nolan felt something settle inside him that wasn't grief or dust. It was weight, but the good kind, the kind you choose to carry. Beside him, Iris exhaled, her breath a pale ghost in the cold. I think my father would have liked you, she said. Nolan didn't know what to say to that, so he only nodded and stayed beside her under the stars. The wind over Ravendraw Ranch carried no threat that night, only the soft breath of autumn moving through the dry grass. Inside, the fire burned low, not the restless kind you have to feed every hour, but the settled kind, steady, sure. Doing its work without fuss. Nolan Cassidy had bought a ranch for $1, but that wasn't the thing that changed his life. It was the woman he found already living there, the one who had turned an abandoned house into something worth protecting, the one who had faced down her past without flinching, even when it rode in with a gun in its hand. Some folks would call it chance, others fate. Nolan knew better. Out here, in a land that gives nothing freely, you make your own luck, and if you're fortunate, you share it. They would fix the fences before winter, mend the barn roof, bring life back into the fields. It wouldn't be easy, but the work ahead was theirs. 2 people who had carried their losses long enough to know that the only way forward was together. And maybe, just maybe, the scars they carried weren't only reminders of what they'd lost, but proof they'd survived. Tell us, what did this story stir in you? Drop your thoughts in the comments and rate it from 0 to 10. If you want more stories like this one, make sure to subscribe and ring that bell so you never miss a ride. If this story touched something in you, the next one rides even deeper. And if you've ever chosen silence over revenge, comment. I understand Nolan. Slow pullback from the porch. Two figures framed in the lamplight. The ranch house small against the vast night sky. The sound of wind in the grass fades into soft guitar. And the screen falls to black.